He's shown a very open willingness to use military force in his second term, both in Iran already, but Venezuela, Nigeria, for example. So he does seem to be leaning toward it, at least from his comments. It's unclear what help is on the way. Right after he said that, he did reference the sanctions he was using to help bring down the economy even further. So it might not have been referenced to military action, but I do think it's on the table for sure. And I think by saying that he wasn't going to meet with the Iranians right now, that indicates that diplomacy really doesn't have a path forward. So it's probably military action. Obviously, covert action could be with that or not. So we'll have to see.
It's thought at least 2,000 people have been killed as the Iranian regime continues its brutal crackdown on anti-government protests that have swept across the country. There are reports that the death toll could be much higher. Tonight, President Trump told the protesters help is on the way as he urged them to take over their institutions. He was speaking at the Detroit Economic Club tonight.
By the way, to all Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions if possible, and save the name of the killers and the abusers that are abusing you. You're being very badly abused. If the numbers are right now, I hear 5 different sets of numbers. I hear numbers. Look, 1 death is too much. And I've canceled all meetings with the Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. And all I say to them is help is on its way. You saw that I put tariffs on anybody doing business with Iran.
Well, President Trump pointed to some of his recent military operations, including the seizing of President Maduro in Venezuela, and he rejected criticism of his foreign policy.
You have people, Democrats, they say, I don't know if we should have done Venezuela, I don't know. Anybody that says that hates our country, okay? That was as flawless an attack as there has ever been. And they asked us to help them. They have 50 million barrels of oil. They said, take it. It's $5 billion. And we did. We're working with the Venezuelan people and representatives, and it's amazing. But that was an amazing situation. But we did al-Baghdadi, flawless. We did Soleimani, flawless. We did the Iran nuclear attack where we wiped out their nuclear capacity, which would have been very bad. You wouldn't have peace in the Middle East, flawless. We did them all flawless. I want to keep it going that way, too. I like flawless. Think about Jimmy Carter, the great Jimmy Carter, with the helicopters crashing, the hostages all over the place. Remember that one? Think about Sleepy Joe Biden with Afghanistan. What a disaster. The most embarrassing day in the history of our country, in my opinion. Real dope.
Well, on the programme tonight, I spoke earlier to Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam, who is a spokesperson for Iran Human Rights, and he told me what he's heard from his contacts inside Iran about the number of casualties.
Today, we got some communication with some people inside the country, and so in one city, we have 70 people, and he was from that city, and I told him, well, we have come up with 70, and he said, that's too little. They have massacred the whole city.
Well, I'm joined now by Mick Mulroy, former US Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Good evening to you, Mick.
Good to be back with you, Carol.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. We've clearly heard President Trump signalling some kind of US intervention. We know that he's been briefed on potential options, including military options. Do you think that he is trying to prepare us all, prepare public opinion for some kind of military operation?
I think it's quite possible. And of course, he's shown a very open willingness to use military force in his second term, both in Iran already, but Venezuela, Nigeria, for example. So he does seem to be leaning toward it, at least from his comments. It's unclear what help is on the way. Right after he said that, he did reference the sanctions he was using to help bring down the economy even further. So it might not have been referenced to military action, but I do think it's on the table for sure. And I think by saying that he wasn't going to meet with the Iranians right now, that indicates that diplomacy really doesn't have a path forward. So it's probably military action. Obviously, covert action could be with that or not. So we'll have to see.
I mean, he clearly does feel somewhat buoyed by that operation against Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Flawless, we heard him describe it there. But taking action against the regime in Iran would be so much harder, so much more complex, wouldn't it?
It would, and hopefully it's the conversation today started with an intelligence assessment about whether U.S. taking military action would actually help or hinder the opposition's, attempts to unseat the regime. It might be viewed as simply, here's the U.S., they're coming in, this is all created by them, fabricated. Obviously, that's not the case. It's far too extensive. But hopefully that was part of the discussion of whether these, military options, whether they're light, mostly symbolic, or very substantial, would help or hinder the overall effort of these opposition protesters.
Because, I mean, just as in Venezuela, we saw the removal of Nicolas Maduro, but pretty much all the rest of his regime remains in place. You could presumably take out one or two key figures in the Iranian regime, and still, if the vast security apparatus stayed loyal, that might not make any difference.
True. I think the worst case scenario, if the regime is toppled, say the supreme leader either departs the country or is killed in some kind of kinetic strike, would be the IRGC simply takes over. The protector of the regime in the first place. And in many accounts, the IRGC has been pushing for Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon, has actually been held back by the Ayatollah. So that also has to be part of the calculation. You might, yes, decapitate a despotic regime indeed, but it might not end up with the idea that the opposition would then take over and they would be much more inclined to join the community of nations and obviously be less hostile to the region. That's what we'd all like to see, but it's not a guaranteed. And I think that's part of the equation today when it comes to these discussions. If they're going to go for a complete decapitation strike and a sustained military effort to really try to bring down the regime, what is going to be its replacement? And I think that's a key component of anything that happens going forward, or should be at least, in Iran.
He's already issued these warnings for US citizens, though, to leave the area by whatever means is possible. I mean, surely he can't issue all these remarks, make it clear that he could be prepared to do something, send out those messages, help is on its way, and then not take some kind of direct action.
I think that's a fair assessment. If it was simply to try to get Iran back to the table to negotiate some kind of new nuclear agreement, then I don't think he would have cut out any idea that they would have those discussions. So that leads to what kind of military action, if this is where it's leaning. It could be largely symbolic, it'd just be regime security targets, but it could be very substantial. And if it's very substantial, I think everybody will see the flow of military assets going into the region, just like last time. And you'll eventually see U.S. military members start leaving places like Al Udeid, which is going to be a prime retaliatory target of the regime. So there'll be very clear indications. Of course, the military would like to hide them, but it would be so robust that it would be seen, I think, by most media and certainly airplane watchers in the world, which can see the flow of not just the bombers that they could use, but all the support aircraft to include the refuelers. They would have to start flowing in that direction for this to be a sustained, substantial military effort against the regime.
Just finally, I mean, when we saw those US strikes on Iranian nuclear targets, it's clear that there was a huge amount of collaboration with the Israelis and that Israeli intelligence could be crucial here, couldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, the Israeli intelligence focuses pretty much almost exclusively on Iran and their proxy forces. So they're going to have very good intelligence. They might also participate. They're very comfortable. We saw in the 12-day war, they essentially eliminated the air and missile defense and the Iranian Air Force within 48 hours. So they have the ability to do that, and that could be in conjunction with the United States. It won't be the same kind of strikes. Obviously, you don't need to use the 30,000-pound GBU-57, which are bunker-busting bombs, unless potentially they're going after the supreme leader and they believe he's in one of these bunkers. But I do think it would likely be in some kind of consolidation with the opposition force, the protesters, in that they'll go after IRGC. The Basij, of course, are a major threat to these protesters. They're a very substantial paramilitary force internal to Iran. But I think that's what they're going to focus on, potentially leadership as well. Hopefully they're thinking about what the day after would bring and whether it would bring a government that is more aligned with becoming part of the community of nations. But that's not necessarily what's going to happen. Oftentimes in vacuums like this, the strongest are the ones that take over. So that's going to have to be something to be considered if they're going to really do a hard strike on the regime.
Mick Mulroy, former US Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Really good to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Carol. Good to be with you again.